But I do want to give you a chance to switch the tables on me and maybe like go in on yourself. And don't be afraid to ask hard questions either. So
Yeah, so I think for me, like to what I was saying earlier, I really want people to kind of my vision for what I do is I want to whet people's appetite for these ideas because I think for some people they're never they're gonna have to hear it from a white boy before they're gonna hear it from anybody else for whatever for whatever reason, better or worse. And so my vision is really to whet people's appetites to go, hey, there's something here. Please follow this thread. And so I think for me, like talking to you is like a perfect. You're the perfect example of this, where it's like, okay, great. Like I've got a bunch of videos about, hey, here's why policing is fucked up. Here's all the bad things about it. Here's what we got to do. But in my one of my most recent abolition videos, I said I quoted criticalresistance.org is a website that I use sometimes when I'm looking to do research on police and prison abolition. And one of the writers there, he wrote this statement that I really like, where he said, when we talk about abolition, I think it can help to talk about things that we have to build more than things that we have to destroy sometimes. And so, from your perspective of how you grew up and where you grew up, and feel free to be as specific or non-specific as you want, but what did you need that wasn't there? What was missing from your community? What was missing from your area, from your city? What do we need to build where you grew up to service that community, to help people thrive, to help, to help make a better life that everybody can thrive in, that everybody can have dignity, like when you think of the things that we must build to create a better and more just world, where you're from, what does that look like?
I mean, I think for me, it's a really hard thing to give an answer to because there's multiple things. There's like the material things which are a little bit easier, but then I think a lot of stuff has had a lot of ripples, and the ripples are harder to cure than the material situations, right? But the things I think about off the top though was like making sure that everybody has the resources to be housed, to have opportunities to feed themselves. I mean, not just opportunities, to have opportunities and to be able to guarantee to be able to feed themselves. I guess the basic safety nets and community as well to be able to support them. Because one of the things that feels like was really destroyed, at least with my generation, was community, and so our support networks were just like ripped out from under us. And so I think there's a material standpoint, but there's also a social standpoint, and it's how do you reunify people that have been pulled apart, and that's a really big question because for a lot of us it's years now. Like I mean, I haven't seen my community be my community in like since I was a teenager. You know, I mean, I'm like 35 right now. I can run for president. I hate to admit that I'm that old, but uh, you know, it's really hard to give a straight up answer like that. I definitely think housing. I definitely think that the things that a lot of the social dems shout from the rooftops, and I agree with that. Don't agree with their approach. I don't agree with social dems, but like housing, yes, food, yes, shelter, yes, the ability to have access to resources. I think that would in itself reduce crime by a lot because most crime is like crimes of like necessity and need and trying to get the things you need, and if those are eliminated that would remove a lot of crime. But then at the same time, things like DV, things like sexual assault, the things like pedophilia, things like all these traumatic things that are based on people passing trauma, I think takes a lot more. They'll be a lot more complicated. Luckily, it's not the majority of crime. Luckily, but still, yet and still, like that has to be dealt with one way or another. And I don't want to act like there's one answer to any of that because that's where it gets really complicated, individual, based off like community needs, safety needs, and also what it takes for healing. So I think that can get really complicated really fast. And I'm speaking also from somebody who comes from like a background where my grandma beat me my whole life. I grew up on Section 8, didn't really have any support networks for shit. So I kind of was worse off than a lot of people as far as that is given. Not necessarily the worst I have pretty bad circumstances, but there are definitely people that have worse circumstances than me. But as far as support networks, I didn't have it for shit. I grew up pretty poor, but that I feel like that did have a lot to do with me getting into crime. But I feel like also I don't want to dwell on that because I also know people that like What's some shit that I could never even comprehend at the same time. So like compared to like some middle class people, like yeah, I got it pretty bad. Even compared to some poor people. But then I've also met people that like make my shit look like I'm whining to complain about. You know what I mean? And so it's just like everything's like, I guess, what's the word? A spectrum. You know what I mean? So it's hard to give an answer for spectrum questions. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you think one of the aspects that I really like as I'm learning about anarchism and leftism and things like that is the concept of mutual aid and communities taking care of their own. Do you think can these kinds of changes, can these kinds of material conditions be changed purely through mutual aid? I mean, can we all just can we bootstrap this thing as a community altogether, or is it going to take full on systemic revolution to even scratch the surface of this? It's the thing I wonder about. Like, is it enough to go to a Food Not Bombs and donate food and things like that? Or I mean, are we going to have to strip the whole thing down? Do you see mutual aid organizations as being effective at scale, or are we going to have to think of something else?
I think the way I think of mutual aid is necessary, but I think it's like kind of how the Panthers phrase it, like man, I'm forgetting the phrase they use, but like basically survival pending revolution. It's not how they phrase it. I'm spacing it right now, but I kind of really agree with that. I think revolution and decolonization is a mandatory. And I'm not talking about decolonize your mind and all that. I mean, I hear people say that all the time. Like, I don't even buy that. I believe I'm very Fananian and like and reading him very materially is like decolonization as an action is what it needs to be able to treat it internally. To decolonize internally, you have to do it externally. And I think by that action, it has to happen. Now, we can think about roles being different. I'm not going to advocate one specific thing or another because there's a lot of ways. I mean, divestment is definitely a part of that, right? But divestment from the system is a bigger thing than people usually realize. It's not like divesting from one business. It's like, no, like we are literally gonna be autonomous and we're not gonna care. Like an example of divestment that has not full on like revolution with like the EZLN, for example. That's an example of divestment. And now there's still strings because they're still dealing with like other power like a power source that is trying to control and dominate them. And so that's always going to be a thing with due power structures until we have enough of them that then the main structure is losing its power and dwindling. And I'm not going to say much, but yes, conflict is going to definitely be a part of it because no system, no country is going to want to give up its power. And since the power comes from us, if we choose to divest, then it has to push dominance. Like, for example, they did with the railroads with Rockefeller at the Ludwood massacre, where they killed a whole bunch of like workers and family and their children because they wouldn't submit. And I think the more we divest, the more we're going to see things like that. And we still do right now, but people just don't acknowledge it a lot because a lot of it happens to black folks or to brown folks or to people they just don't really want to care about. And not just any black folks, but people at the bottom. And yeah, a lot of times when you elevate black voices, also there's some class stuff to that. You know what I mean? Usually. And I think a lot of times the people that people want to listen to aren't the people it's happening to. So kind of went a little side tangent, but yeah.
Yeah, so you kind of brought it up. I was going to ask too, are there any places or projects that you're excited about that you think are starting to do this right? Are there organizations or groups that you think show promise? I know people are like, oh, should I join the DSA or the IWW? And I know every whatever has its merits or whatever you're trying to accomplish. I mean, but are there organizations or projects that you think people should take notice of or learn from or invest in if they're ongoing?
I mean, I can I first have to plug the org I'm a part of, Fight Toxic Prisons specifically. I think we do a lot not only to dismantle prison, but as well as mutual aid. That includes bailout. That includes teaming up to support people, whether it's through like trying to do our best to supply food or connect them to resources where they can. And I think having coalition organizing like we do, like for example, with Black Mama Bailout, IWalk, and there's a lot of orgs that are doing it. I think the full aspect of what I want to see isn't really existing in the US. Just because of somewhat our privilege, but also somewhat because of the way we're oppressed. Because we're oppressed, I think, heavier than we think. Definitely heavier than we think we are, but heavier than I think a lot of countries not just in the first world, but I even say in the third world sometimes, or but we just it's just spread out in a way that it makes it less clear to see. So I think I went off. I forgot what I was saying now. My bad.
It's all good. Yeah, I think, another thing I was thinking of um, was just that, if someone is watching this right now who is, maybe one of those people, it's like, oh, I don't like to get too political. I don't know about all this stuff. And, somebody who's, they, you know, they're not into theory, they're not into politics, but there's somebody who's watching what's happening in the country right now, what's happening in the Black Lives Matter protests, what's happening, in the Derek Chauvin trial. If there's somebody watching this right now that's concerned about this and not sure what to think about law enforcement, not sure what to think about cops, what is your message to them? What is your statement to somebody who's maybe hasn't really ever thought about it before? What's your perspective from your community, the people that you grew up with, the people that you love, your neighbors, your friends, your family? What's your message to people who are like, well, the law enforcement, I mean, they're basically good, right? Or they basically help out. Like, what do you want people to take away from this conversation? If they could only take away one nug from this conversation, what to you do you think is the most important message that you bring to the table?
I mean, I think one of the things I would definitely say is people should read up their history as well about policing and prisons, and it's really important for us to realize that prisons itself and policing came directly from the slave trade and is a continuation of that. And if we want to see it, we don't have to get all in theory and analysis. We can just look at history to see that. And I think what would it feel like if our roles were reversed? What would it feel like if it was your community and not mine? If my community was the one doing the encaging, enslaving, shooting, killing, maiming of all your community to be able to make a profit for some make a profit for Jay-Z. Let me use another black person. You make a profit for Jay-Z, you know what I mean? And Beyonce and Oprah. Like, what if that was it? How would that feel? And I'm pretty sure that people will be, specifically white people, will be up in arms ready to revolt, right? So, and the thing is, like, they would not tolerate what they do to us done to them. And I think when you see that, if if you can't see that, you should probably try to find allyship with us, or I guess allyship is not a word I want, but if you find us in a space where we can stand together against it, then like how is it not just furthering white supremacy? How are you not a white supremacist? How are you not the equivalent to the Nazi population during Nazi Germany? And that's the thing I make a big comparison about, because not everybody was a soldier. You know what I mean? A lot of people just turned blind eyes. A lot of people just said, "Oh, but it's the law. Oh, but it's this. Oh, but it's that." And how were you different from that? And then also say going forward, I think the most important thing is to find a ways we can have find each other's mutual liberation. Because I'm not asking you to come fight my battle for me. I'm asking you to stay out the way and to fight your battle alongside with me. You know what I mean? Don't get in my way, and also try to liberate yourself. You know what I mean? I'm not going to ask anything that Fred Hampton would have asked of the people he'd reach out to when he reached out to young patriots, right? It's like, no, realize that we have the same problem and that we can stand together to get liberated. You just got to see me truly as equal and respect the knowledge that I may carry and my community may carry. And you know what I mean? And don't got to see me as higher. Don't see me as above. I'm an anarchist. We're not. I'm not above you, but also see me with respect. You feel me?
For sure. So, does tough on crime law enforcement deter crime?
No. I'd argue that it probably increases it because it makes the profit margins much higher. Because if you're having crackdowns, the profit margins go up. The risk goes up, the profit margins go up. So I think if anything, it encourages people to do it because they have more of an incentive to be able to get into these streets and try to make that money when there's a higher profit margin. You know, like the old capitalist saying, the more risk, more reward, right? So it's the same thing. When you crack down, you just add more risk, which adds more reward. And if we, for example, stop the drug war, that'd be a good help on like actually driving drug prices down, which then would also, if the drug prices drop down, will be less impactful in a negative way on those who are addicted. Because part of the reason is so fucked up is people have to spend so much money to keep their habits going. Which I think honestly could be medicalized in some way where people could get what they needed to cope with their things, and then you could try to work on transitioning people off of it. And some people might not feel like they could ever come off of it. And if they need to do that to survive, they should be able to do that to survive. Because I don't think people should be killing themselves just so they can be sober. You know what I mean? And that's just not the thing. And now, I didn't want to support anybody who's chasing sobriety. Don't keep me wrong, but like I think that's an important thing to like differentiate because some people can't. Like, if you try to force me to stop smoking weed, bro, you want me to be an asshole all the time? Because I'll be a complete smooth dick, angry motherfucker if you get me sober. And it's not because I smoke too much weed. It's because I've always been like that with sober because I went through hellish shit as a kid. So, weed keeps me chill. Shit.
So, and feel free to talk about this or not talk about this, whatever, whatever you feel like. But, from what you've talked about, it sounds like you have some experience with incarceration and doing some time. Does jail or prison rehabilitate? Does it teach you new skills? Does it encourage you to rethink your life choices?
No. Anytime someone rehabilitates in any type of way, it's because of them and them alone. The only thing it gives you is time alone in a very miserable place. And some people, and it's very few, can find their way in solitude. But the thing is, most people don't. Like I feel like I found my way, but that was some degree luck, right? There was some degree feeling absolutely screwed, feeling played, feeling a lot of things that happened around that time, right? That I started reading. And I also was so poor I couldn't watch TV because I was in like the feds. So like that left me with a situation where you had to buy a head like a radio and shit to listen to watch TV. So what that encouraged me to do, read books is all I could do. So I read a whole bunch of books. And that helped free my mind. But that had nothing to do with prison. It had to do with my specific circumstances and my specific like way of thinking as well as like my poverty. Because if I wasn't poor, I would have been watching TV the whole bit. Like I would have bet dead ass would have been trying to escape by watching TV. But because I didn't have the money, I was forced to read and educate myself, and I'm literally a completely different person after I came out than I was before I went in. One thing it did teach me though is the cold ass hard reality of what America and the society is, right? The race conflicts, the tension within prison, and I've always studied this forever. It's not that prison is different or worse people. It's a microcosm of what America really is. The only difference is in America, when you're outside, you have more space, and so you don't have to deal with the contradictions as up front. And so that's the only thing that taught me is exactly how like this country functions and how power and politics function. But a lot of people won't get the lessons from that. That was just lessons that I got from it because of how I function, and I think most people won't come out with that. You know what I mean? And so I think in the end, for most people, it's more detrimental. It might have worked good for me, but again, that was mainly because of me. It wasn't because of prison. It was because I like, okay, if I'm gonna be in here, because my first thing was when I went to prison, like I am going to get a degree because I'm not gonna waste this time if I gotta fucking sit down here. Got there, no degrees available. You cannot do that. They do not. They did it back with Bill Clinton. It wasn't a Republican. It was a Democrat that ended that. So let me put that out there. They ended that with Bill Clinton, and so all I did is get my hands on every book I could and try to educate myself because I couldn't go to college, and that led to me reading things that kind of appealed to me more, which is more like the Black Panthers, W. Du Bois, even read some right wing leaning stuff like Behold the Pale Horse and stuff like that, which has some bullshit, but I think has some valid shit that was interesting to learn from. And 48 Laws of Power and a million different things that just led me to like consistently evaluate not only my outlook on life, but like my politics around life or my understanding around politics. And I think one thing that prison did do is teach me the truest understanding of politics, which is navigation of power among people. And everything else is a facade. All this Democrat, Republican, left, right to me is pretty much a facade. You know what I mean? It's like the power navigating itself. And then we might have opinions. I have opinions, but that I don't necessarily view my opinions in politics. Like I fall on the left because I'm an anarchist. I fall on the left because I'm a communist. But for example, I don't see myself as a leftist. I just see myself as an anarchist and a communist who has my views. You know what I mean? So
So if I go back to this sort of non-political, non deeply educated, on these topics type of person who's watching this and is moved by it, what are a couple books that are maybe entry level or that you think people should what would you recommend if you were going to hand somebody a couple of books and say, hey, this is the real shit? Like, what would you hand them? Anything come to mind? Any standouts that you think newbies would be moved by?
I don't know if everything I'm gonna say is good for newbies. I have no clue. I mean, they work for me, but I don't know like how that what's best for people. And I honestly think it'd be different for who it was, depending on who was asking. Um, I do recommend this for everybody, but for example, Rest of the Earth, I would recommend to black folks and brown folks off top, and like later on in development, uh, offer to white folks because I feel like white folks would be automatically turned off by it because they're the antagonist. So but like also like there's the let's see, I would say um when you talk about police, I would say Our Enemies in Blue. That was a good one. It goes very much into the history and stuff about the police. It was very educational the first time I read that. I definitely think I mean, this is like baby stuff because I guess this is my baby stuff because I read this first before I really got there. Between Barack and A Hard Place, though that's not necessarily a leftist analysis, the dose of reality and the way the system is gets a rude awakening in that book. Like he talks a lot about how the government treated people in Katrina and like how like there was like literally squads of white folks hunting them down, how the police were attacking black folks. It goes really deep in depth, and that's not like a he's Tim Wise is a liberal, so I wouldn't like follow his analysis, but given a rude awakening of the reality, I would definitely say that. Damn, and then Revolutionary Suicide by U.E.P. Newton and Asada Shakur. Off top, those are like good starters in my mind. I do like Fanon and Revolutionary Suicide probably last. It gets a little more. It's where it gets a little heavier in my mind, but so.
Cool. And then I think kind of the last one along these same lines for me, anyway, the last kind of question I had was, so again, we have somebody watching this, they're moved by it, they're like, wow, this really changed my perspective on things. You know, tomorrow, what are what are we supposed to do? What do we do tomorrow? Because this is a question that even I have is I see the world that I want, and it's way out there. It's far away. Like to some extent, I've had to make peace with the fact that the world that I think would be just and kind and the kind of world that I want to live in, I don't think I'll see it in my lifetime. I've kind of had to make peace with that. Like I want to, I hope I do, but I kind of don't think I will see the world I want to build. So I got to think, okay, tomorrow, what do I want to do tomorrow? Where do I put my money tomorrow? Where do I put my time? So if you have the ear of lots of people right now who want to know what do I do tomorrow? What's a physical, concrete act I can do tomorrow? Do you have any recommendations? Do you have any a sense of where the most need is? Is it just cash somewhere? Is it bodies volunteering somewhere? Is it bodies on picket lines? What's your perspective on this?
I mean, I think it's all the above, to be honest. But I feel like putting if you have resources, put it money where your mouth is, but you put it into organizers you believe in, or organizations you believe in, or just causes you believe in. I think like I said, FTP is a good place. iWalk's a good place. Black Mama Bailiff's a great place. You know what I mean? Put it into mutual aid networks for sure. And also, if you don't have resources, put your time and labor there. I think also as far as like putting your time into like direct actions that have a goal. I'm not saying to go protest just to protest. 'Cause I'm not really with that anymore. I did that a lot when I was younger, and I realized kind of the weakness of that. But demonstrations, whether you're talking about against prisons, against police precincts, against the FOP, fraternity of police, or SPOG in my city, um, whether it's just helping like your neighbor or a stranger out, just like pushing goodwill forward. Um, Interject if you see like police violence or terrorism. You know what I mean? The best you can. I know it's scary, but like the best you feel like you can. I mean, I guess there's a million little things that you can do, but I think the main thing is directly get involved, fight for prison abolition, fight for the abolition of police, fight for the abolition of state, and to save our planet, because that's also a big problem we're dealing with right now. Um, so I think whatever steps you can take is based off of like where you are and what it is. But there's plenty of orgs you can reach out to. There's plenty of ways you can put some energy forward. You know, like for example, FTP. Every time there's a disaster, we have like phone zaps where we call in to the prisons and like get thousands of people to put pressure on them to evacuate so people don't die. There's little things you can do and there's bigger things you can do. It just depends on your location, your ability, and what you're willing to give. Because that's a big part too. Is what are you willing to give? Because some people aren't willing to give the same thing. Some of us are willing to give our lives for this shit. Not everybody's willing to do that. Um, and yeah, and it's weird for me because I've been YouTubing for a while, but I've just started taking YouTube seriously because I've been doing organizing for the last like over a decade. And that's like, even though I try to do YouTube, I kind of take it seriously because everything was about like trying to build and build that. And I'm still doing that, but I'm just taking a different strategy and different way to do it because now I'm like more invested in FTP versus like being all over the place. And I'm more like trying to build infrastructure versus just uh, tearing shit up in the streets. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess just a follow up to that is, I think, when I think of mutual aid, I think of my community. So I'm thinking of Louisville, and Louisville, Kentucky. How do I get involved in Louisville, Kentucky? But I get people that watch this channel from all over, Chicago and Seattle and Los Angeles and New York, but also Indianapolis and you know Springfield, wherever, and little tiny towns wherever. How do you may not even have an answer for this, I don't know, but you know if somebody's in a town, how do they know how do they know who's helping? How do they know, do you just Google mutual aid Springfield, Missouri? Or how do people find their local area that's doing good work and not just I know there's a lot of grifters out there, and there's a lot of organizations that maybe take a lot of money for marketing and don't put it back into the community. So how does somebody in a smaller town or in a smaller neighborhood, how do they find that? Do they Google it? Are there maybe national orgs that direct to local orgs? Or how do we know who to trust? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think there's some public resources like there's the Slingshot, which is like talks about a lot of anarchist spaces, in different places. I think some places there just isn't anybody. You know what I mean? Especially when you get to the central, like the center of America. Like there's like I've met people that are literally they're only anarchists or only communists in their whole fucking town. So it gets really complicated at that point. I mean, social media is a good way to reach out. Just be careful. And I think at the end you got to just I'm not a Bible person anymore, so but I'm gonna quote it like test the spirits, right? Test where people are really coming from and try to figure it out because you're not gonna know right away. We're all gonna make misassessments, or we might be suspicious of somebody that's later confirmed, but we don't know at first. You know what I mean? If you have good instincts, I tend to have really good instincts, so I tend to be suspicious of people who later on I figure out why I'm suspicious of. But even then, I can't make a full on judgment until I know for real. I might be like, they rub me wrong, but I don't know why yet. Um, so I mean, just use discretion. Make people earn your trust, but also don't be scared of putting the work just because with people you don't trust either. You know what I mean? Just make sure that you put in the right work with people you don't trust. Don't like if you can't trust somebody, don't like compromise yourself to put in work with them. Just do stuff that's safe to do, and then build those relationships. And you find out you can trust them, then you get closer to them. If you find out you can't, then you don't. No matter what, to some degree, this is going to be a risk, especially after the George Floyd stuff. They like send out so many infiltrators during that time period, and they're probably going to use that tactic from now on. And they always have, but it was like a whole new level, at least in Seattle. I'm not going to speak for other places, but in Seattle, whole new level infiltration. Um, and so like there's always going to be risk to it, and you just got to accept that risk to some degree. But anything that's worth fighting for, anything that's worth pushing for, is going to have risk to it. They're not going to just come easy, and that's just the reality of it. I mean, I wish it would, but it just it's not going to happen.
Yeah, so I think that's my last question. So I mean, the last thing, for me and for my channel is, who are you? What's your name? What's the name of your channel? Plug it. What can people expect to find? Why should they subscribe? What's your deal?
Okay, I realized I didn't even say that at the beginning. But my name is Bigg Villainus. I'm with Fight Toxic Prisons as well as I'm a YouTuber and a musician. Um, you can find me at Overthrow Media on YouTube. The type of content I make is like uh hip hop, politics, and life generally. Like, so I put out music, I make content about hip hop, I make content, a lot of content about politics, not necessarily intentionally, but just because like my nature. I definitely do a lot more short. I'm doing some long what's it called, longer videos, but I do a lot of short videos. Try to make a little funny, a little bit of comedy in there. Try to not necessarily be video essays, more just like takes and little jokes based off of my political perspective. Um, and some reaction stuff, some stuff where I'm responding like that's how we like start interacting with that dang dad is, giving my feedback and stuff, and it's kind of what I do. I think I've been a lot of love, saying that people enjoy it a lot, so I'm glad people have been enjoying it. So I think it's worth checking out. If y'all like it, please sub, and I'm trying to get crack that 1,000 number as soon as possible, and then try to make it into actual career because as someone who's like a lumping background person that has a bunch of felonies in my main experience of organizing, it can get kind of hard to make a successful business happen. But I'm working at it and trying to do it in a way that works to elevate the struggles I'm already trying to push forward and like build liberation. You know what I mean? So I'm trying to make that merge and mix together in like a fun way, in a way that also can reach a lot of people, and not just people who want to hear, yeah, if you want to hear politics, you're gonna like my stuff too, and it might be a break from the other stuff, but also can hopefully bait people in who are less likely to be interested in politics. Though yeah. So that's what it is. Kind of a rant right there.
So, well, so you mentioned hip hop. So, last question: who are you excited about in the world of hip hop right now? Who should we be listening to?
Besides myself, I really like Murray. I really like let's see, I like some people who are deceased now. I do like a lot of gangster stuff, so I do like Pop Smoke. I do like King Von, rest in peace. Definitely Nipsey. Nipsey, I think, is a really good thing. I'm not a capitalist, so I don't agree with him all the way, but I do like how he was building up his community. I think he has some knowledge he can drop. Also, on some political level stuff, people should look up Low Key. People should look up Akala. People should look up, let's see, I'm gonna give a shout out to I'm gonna give a shout out to my homie Slider Silva, who's like kind of, he plays the bad guy of capitalism, but in kind of farcical way, and it come kind of fire. There's some dope ass MCs out there. I don't feel like I'm doing justice. There's a lot of names I could list off. Little Guillotine. So yeah.
Right on. Well, I guess I'll just have to subscribe so they can hear you talk about him. So that channel again was Overthrow Media. Is that right?
Yeah, Overthrow Media, and my name is Bigg Villainus, and you can also follow me at Villainous_music at all my other socials, but Overthrow Media is my YouTube, my main thing. So,
Well, there you go. Go check them out. Go subscribe. Cool. Well, that's what I got. You got anything else for me?
um, I think, how do you want to go? How do you picture going forward in building like resistance and moving toward freedom? And how do you feel like your path is to like earn people's trust, for example, given the background? Sorry, a hard question again at the end, but
No, that's a good question, and it's something that I think a lot about. It was unfortunately a lot of my entry into abolitionist politics has been during COVID. And so I haven't been able to get out of the house and network with people. There of course were protests in Louisville because of Breonna Taylor. But I wasn't, I did not feel comfortable during COVID kind of getting out there. And I know a lot of people took a lot of risks to go do that. And it was something that I kind of really struggled with. Like, should I be out there? What should I be doing? And so it's something where now that, not that COVID's over by any stretch of the imagination, but as we are starting to reopen things and people are starting to get back together, I think it's something for me where for me personally, now that this is something that I'm passionate about and this is something that I'm getting more educated in, it's something for me where I want to start going out into the world, into Louisville, and getting together with organizations out here and finding out what does the Louisville prison population need. Actually, weirdly enough, prior to all of this, even before I was an abolitionist, I got hooked up with a guy who did job placement outreach for people getting out of prison on nonviolent drug offenses. So they would take a job. I think it was called like a Jobs for Life program or something like that. But it was basically it was job training for guys that were about to get out of prison. And so because I was a manager at the time and I hired people at the time, they had me come and do mock interviews and kind of help train these guys on how to give good job interviews and stuff like that. And so I got a chance to actually that was the first time that I started helping people get out of prison instead of helping put them in prison. And I was like, wow, this is way fucking better. So I want to do more stuff like that. I think that's something that I grew to be passionate about. Was I was talking to a lot of people that, I'm trying to train them in how to give a good job interview. And these are people that grew up in poverty. These are people that grew up without the same kinds of resources that I had. And so I'd be like, so, what were your extracurricular activities in school? What do you volunteer with? What are you into? And they're like, what are you talking about? Like, we didn't have extracurricular activities. I've been working since I was 14 out on the farm. Like, so that's something that I personally am really passionate about. Louisville in particular, it just we have a very segregated city. And then Eastern Kentucky has been absolutely devastated by the coal community and then by coal mines kind of drying up and leaving these people with nothing. So you have these families that have been coal families for generations, and everybody just left. And they're like, well, figure it out. And so, my in my area in Kentucky, there's a lot of specific to Kentucky problems that I'm really passionate about. So I think if I had any message for people, it would be, what's specific to your area? What is specific to your city? Do you even know? Do you even know what your city is struggling with? And so, yeah, I think for me, it's just getting out of the house, getting involved with people, getting involved with organizations that are putting in the work and that have been putting in the work for decades that I can go learn from. I donate money sometimes. I have access to a lot of personal protective equipment, so I've donated a lot of PPE to protesters, goggles, masks, things like that, because I've had access to some of that stuff. So that's something that I can bring to the table, and that's something I always tell people, what do you bring to the table? What do you have access to that you can, go out into your community and find out what they need and bring it to them? Is it food? Is it cooking? Is it time? Is it, we talked a lot about trauma. I mean, God, we barely scratched the surface on that. There's a lot of really hurt, angry people out there who need love and support and listening and therapy and just somebody to hear their story and tell them, hey, that was really fucked up. You didn't deserve that. Maybe your talent is being with people and grieving with them and helping them to grieve these shitty things that have happened to them. I don't know, but so yeah, I think for me it's getting off the computer and we talked about books and it's good to learn, but I suspect you would agree. It's good to get out of the book and out onto the street and find out what does your neighbor need? What does the guy down the street need? What does the mom down the street need? Can you give her a ride somewhere? Can these kinds of things like these are the questions that I am seeking to answer in Louisville for me anyway.
That- Yeah, and even how you systematize that in a way that makes it effective to help multiple people is one of the things that I've been trying to figure out. Because I honestly early on did a lot of, and I still will do it, but like a lot of things where it's like helps individuals, like individual families and stuff, like drop box drops, we drop boxes of like healthy food. We did like barbecues, and stuff like that, and those are good. And food is always good. I always help people, but the problem is trying to find a way to systematize it so you can reach more people and also being able to, in some case, get more of the resources. Because some of that stuff was coming from a food bank, but a lot of it ended up going towards people who didn't need it quite as much. You know what I mean? Versus people who needed it more. And part of that was because the people who had the resources, not only that through the food bank, but also like the vehicle to transport it. With like for example, they'd help me get it out because I didn't have a car and I still don't have a car yet. But get it out to like 4 or 5 people, but then they take like 20 boxes out to like Issaquah, which needs a lot less, and you know what I mean. But they would only willing to donate so much of their time to that, which makes it harder. But when you have bigger systems and people are specifically aiming it at people who need it the most, then it makes it a lot more effective. But it's again, how do you build those systems is the hard part because that takes resources, it takes money, it takes gas, it takes a vehicle, it takes people's time, it takes a lot of pieces, coordination Um, so
Yeah, the word I always use is scale. How do you scale this up? You know, how do you scale up three people doing something cool in one neighborhood? How do you scale that up to a whole? You know, West Louisville's huge, and it's, you know, you could be doing something up in, you know, up in the
Portland.
area that's not doing anything down in Shively and stuff like that. So it's like, how do you, how are we making sure? The other thing I'm really passionate about is, you know, disability activism and disabled rights and disabled access. So that's just something I think about a lot too. Is, you know, great, you can have all the resources in the world, but if disabled people can't find them, if they can't access them, if they can't get down to go get them, you've left out a whole portion of the population that needs it. So that's another area where I'm really passionate, is finding out where disabled people are not being included in conversations and making sure that they're front and center too.
big facts. Um, yeah, there's a lot of pieces because like a lot of people are otherly able or disabled. You know what I mean? And a lot of people are low key disabled. Like they won't necessarily tell you because they know it's already hard enough to get by, and then if they air it out, then they're gonna have a hard time being able to access resources or be able to get resources for themselves. So they'd rather be like shoving through it, especially black folks rather be shoving through it than even admit that we have issues because then people are gonna just ostracize us more. But yeah, anyways, this was a good conversation. I think I'm gonna get ready to stop this recording soon. Any last words before we end it?
Oh, this was awesome. I really appreciate you reaching out and getting to do this. This is a great stuff. I've learned something. I hope people watch and learn too. And yeah, so it's just a lot of fun. I really appreciate you spending time with me tonight.
Dope, dope. Yeah, most def. I think it's gonna be some viral clickbait stuff, like hard, but like ex-con and ex-cop talk. Like people are gonna go crazy for that shit. They're gonna be like, "What?" Uh,
Good. Hope so.
all right, I'm gonna stop
We'll
this.
get you to those 1,000 subs.
Hopefully, I mean, hey, actually, when you, I could tell you reshared it because I automatically got like 100 subs that you shared. I was like, oh shit.